Copy editor?
Editor, I do developmental editing, copy editing. Yeah. I also am a journalist. Hello, my name is Trisha J. Wooldridge. I also write as TJ Wooldridge for stuff that is more child-friendly. I write a combination of fantasy, horror, poetry, middle grade, novella, novel, short story, all of those. I also am a journalist. I used to write for multiple magazines as well as Worcester Magazine, doing food and entertainment reviews. And I also am an editor. I worked for several years at a mid-sized press doing middle grade and YA editing, acquiring books, and helping authors. I'm currently on the board for the New England Horror Writers, and I was the president of Broad Universe, which is an organization that promotes women who write science fiction, fantasy, horror, as well as any underrepresented voices in genre fiction. So I also have 2 horses that are over in Dudley, and I rescue animals, and I do tarot, and lots of other stuff, because I also have ADHD, which means shiny things. So I'm here specifically today talking about my new series, which is The 27 Kingdoms. It's an epic fantasy series, and the first book is Heart, Wings, and Fire. I've been writing fantasy forever because I also play D&D. I've been a gamer for years. I love dragons and unicorns and magical creatures. I also like research and studying, which sounds weird, but when you look at all the creepy things in nature and all of the really amazing things in different cultures. So I did a lot of research for Heart, Wings, and Fire on a variety of indigenous Asian cultures in Taiwan, Vietnam, Korea, because I wanted to look at those. My husband works in Taiwan, so when I went to go visit him, it was absolutely gorgeous. I loved going there. And those are the voices of the characters that came to me when I started writing this. So besides that, I also do horror. I am in Don't Turn Out the Lights, which is a tribute to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Those are all creepy campfire stories, so I can read a little bit from that as well. And I also am in a coloring book with a bunch of different authors, and I can also read a little bit from this. And it is the Beekeeper Queen, which is also inspired by my cousin, who is the bee inspector for the area, and all the cool things with bees. I'm also open to any questions about writing, editing, publishing, anything like that, because I also take several routes. So this is like a very traditionally published through HarperCollins. This is a small press out of North Carolina, where I have a little bit more control over things. And then I also am on the New England Horror Writers Board, and we, not quite indie publish these, but it's a very, very tiny press, so putting these books out. So there are also a lot of roles to publishing, so if anyone has any questions on publishing too, I can answer that. All right, so since I have an audience, do you guys want me to start by reading from Heart, Wings, Fire? I can do the opening chapter, maybe? Yeah, and then I can, if you have any questions, I can start talking about more stuff too. So I will give you an idea of what this is, and they're all very different voices. So again, this is the opening chapter for Heart, Wings, and Fire. A woman should be happy on her wedding day. Beria's mother, the Queen of Hotaro, had told her this many times. She's probably still trying to convince herself, Beri had thought on several occasions. I should be happy. She thought that more than once today, the day, as her maids were binding her into the silken gown. Other occasions, and also throughout this day, the young woman had wondered if there was simply something wrong with her. Perhaps she truly should be happy, should take her place as princess next to her husband. Her father approved. Her mother was happy over the whole affair, thoroughly enjoying every aspect of planning this great event. Hotaro was one of the richest kingdoms in the 27 Kingdoms Treaty. None dared challenge them to war, and all wished to trade with them, in their markets, with their merchants, despite the travel over the ocean. Birya should want for nothing. She should be celebrating every moment of her special day. Instead, the moments disappeared into the blur where many memories went. The ones she couldn't differentiate between dreams, stories, nightmares, or actual events. More and more frequently, she'd found herself blending these things together to soften the edges. There was a reason she developed this habit, but that reason was lost between the blurry edges. Her maids exchanged smiles and giggles as they carefully arranged the fabric, covering her arms and back. The fabric around her neck nearly choked her, but she knew a woman must be modest, especially on the day she was promised to her man. And there were all the scars to cover. Scars and... Birya let herself fall back between the fuzzy edges, trying not to wince as one of the women tightened her belt cloth a little too hard. The maids, of course, knew to avert their eyes as they dressed her. For modesty, again. Only a husband should cast his eyes upon so much of his wife's skin. She should enjoy the moment. It was her own fault she didn't recognize the small joys in life. Forcing a laugh and smile, she selected ribbons for her maids to braid into her simple brown-black hair. It wasn't a raven black like her mother's, nor the hued, deep browns and blacks of the other women's. It was dull and heavy, no matter what her maids did. So she selected the most expensive ribbons, laced with threads of gold and bronze to help make it prettier. The sun shines brightly with nary a cloud, my princess, a fortunate sign for the parade. A younger maid smiled as she braided gold and white ribbon. Parade? Birya didn't recall rehearsing for a parade. My princess, are you all right? Asked Singh, Birya's personal attendant. She remembered Singh's name because Singh was always there, always knew the right thing to say when Birya forgot. She was a few years older than Birya, with beautiful black straight hair kept in slightly more intricate style than the other maids. Loosen the tie wrap. I'm forgetting the practice for the parade. Heat flushed Birya's cheeks. That was bad. Sweat would cake the makeup used to pale her skin like fine dishes and sculptures. She wouldn't be perfect for the wedding. She had to be perfect. And she was forgetting the parade. Her hand shot out, clenching the cuff of Singh's sleeve, like an eagle grasping a mouse. Remind me what I must do for the parade, my Singh. You must simply sit beside your husband in the coach behind the dragon statue, Singh crooned, using her free hand to stroke Birya's hair. There's nothing you need to practice for today. Breathe. Remember to breathe. I'll have Mohi keep your dress a little looser. It can't be too loose, you know. It would be improper. Birya shut out the world, thinking only on her breath as it came through her nose, brushing her upper lip like the kiss of a tiny wind. But Singh... She found herself unable to let go of the woman's cuff. Though Birya's eyes were closed, the rustle of Singh's silks indicated her beloved maid was shooing the other girls out. She wouldn't let her princess be embarrassed with another episode. Birya loved Singh for her kindness. The delicate patter of feet and swishes of dresses left the room. Birya found it a little easier to breathe. What is it, my love, my princess? Asked Singh. If I shall be sitting beside my husband, then is the parade happening after my wedding? Her answer was silence. Breathing became hard again. What was she forgetting? What was she getting wrong? Singh? Her voice squeaked like the sound of baby chicks. My princess. Singh lifted Birya's chin and ran her thumb over each of Birya's eyebrows. Birya blinked, then looked at her maid, hating the pity in her eyes, hating the delicate edge that always seemed to cut, but needing that cut, needing that focus, sharpness. It cut away at the comforting blurry edges. Sometimes it helped. This time, it didn't. She shook her head, begging for the explanation. My princess, today is the parade of the family dragon. There was a nudge to Singh's voice. The tone pushed against some memory stone. Birya pictured her mind as a broken mosaic, each stone hiding a memory, each memory a piece of her life story. But nothing loosened free. It's the celebration of the day your husband freed you from the dragon. Before he was your husband, of course. I was captured by a dragon? Dragons are truly real? But before he was my husband? My wedding? My princess. The edge in Sing's eyes now sharpened her tongue. Your wedding was 5 years ago. The day before the second parade of the family dragon. So that's Birya. She clearly has some issues in life that revolve around dragons and not so great family. Any questions so far? Yeah.
What book is this?
This is Heart, Wings, and Fire. It is the first book in a series that I'm writing.
Sweet, you're actually writing?
Yes. Yeah.
I've been trying to write a book for so long. I have the details out. Like, I know the general details, like the general plot, but I can't ever get the finer details, nor not to even mention the actual getting it to page.
Sometimes just writing it on the page gets it out.
How do you, like, I'm always like, I see authors like for Hunger Games, how do they actually have the time to sit down and just do it? How do they actually get themselves to focus on it?
Yeah, well, I've got ADHD too, so it's actually really hard.
Right? It's like,
yeah.
It's like, it's just so annoying.
It is. It's what I love though, so I play around with it. I play with my time, and then I'll just set short timers. There's a lot of really interesting things about being neurodiverse and a creator, because our brains work differently. We don't follow. It can be. It's harnessing how it works differently. We don't always follow the rules the way people say, like, write every day. Don't edit what you write. I'm like, that's not going to work for me. I can't write every day.
Yeah. Part is something I can do because my grammar and spelling and all that stuff by nature. I'm like, okay, I can deal with lack of grammar and spelling. I could just have someone fix it for me so it's not atrocious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Friends who are, well, for lack of a better term, grammar Nazis. So.
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm a professional editor as well. So I edit, and I enjoy editing. But when I write it down, I just need to get it down. So I'll set a timer for sometimes as little as like 20 minutes, get it down and then walk away. Or if I see that I'm actually starting to hyper-focus on it, which is a term for, when there's nothing but this now. Yeah, going down the rabbit hole. Yeah, it's just, I'll keep going. And I also know that for me, at nighttime is when I'm the most creative, when I'm most likely to get stuff done. So I usually stay up later, and fortunately I work from home. So my day job is the editing. So I set my own hours. And by doing that, I get to do my writing part at night and editing at other times. And then all the other business stuff like marketing, answering emails. I'm also on the New England Horror Writers Board. All of that I do at different times during the day when I'm feeling a different set of energy. So I also tend to overwrite, so I will do lots and lots and lots and lots of details, and that's okay. I'd rather have the details up front, and then I can cut out what I don't need later. So that's another way that I do it. As someone who works in publishing and writing, I talk to a lot of writers, and there's writers like me who will overwrite, then there's other writers that like doing the skeleton. And they do the skeleton first, and then they fill it in. And that's how they prefer to write, and that's how they get it done. So just do the skeleton.
One of the things that has helped me get better at writing is writing fan fiction.
Yes, a lot of people actually start out doing that because then you get instant feedback. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with what fanfic is, and I'll throw it up there in case someone's watching who isn't. So fanfic is when you write fiction based on like an existing world. Like Supernatural, Harry Potter, any of those things. You kind of use those. You can't publish that because those belong to an author. So people will write it on their own time and just share it with friends. So those are things that I've seen a lot of authors get started with playing with as a way to find your voice, to figure out what you like. And then from there, authors will take like the ideas they have and go forward. So that's, something that we can play with, and I'm all for trying out all sorts of writing. One of the things I like about writing is that we get to play. Writing is playing. when you look at someone who does like sports and that's their job to, play sports, or it's like a strong commitment, you practice. You want to practice. You're gonna, if you're doing basketball, you're gonna shoot hoops, and not all of those hoops count for games, so is your practice. With writing, it's the same thing. You can practice writing. Not everything needs to be shared. Not everything needs to be something that you sell. It's still practice, and it's still good for honing your craft. And that's something that I'd like to remind people, because a lot of authors are like, I need to publish the first thing I write. And I'm like, no, you don't. I have what a lot of us call them are trunk novels. They're novels that we wrote that we then store. Well, most of us don't have trunks anymore, so they're on our hard drive, hidden in a folder, and they're probably not going to be shared with anyone. But there's little ideas that I'll pull from them that I'll take. But they were like, those are my million words that I needed to figure out how to write, that I wrote before I started getting published. I started getting published in 2008. I did, my first publication was a kind of a sequel to Snow White that was horror, that had murder and other awful things in it. I tend to write dark. Most of my stuff is like, okay, how can I make this worse? I deal with, life can be difficult. I was bullied a lot in school. I was in an overcrowded high school in Springfield. We had like 2,100 people in our school. Yeah, so that meant we actually, like, the geeks found each other, and so I could hang out with the geeks. But, we were like helping each other out. But we also saw some of the worst in the world because we all got picked on. And so you take that and I turn it into my fiction. That's why most of my stuff tends to be horror, or at least really dark. So like, this is very dark. Because, there's abuse in there and many awful things. But also,
Read all of it today.
Yeah, so but it's also overcoming that. Neil Gaiman, who's one of my favorite authors, I'm going to paraphrase his quote, is we read fiction not to look to see or to know that dragons exist, but know that dragons can be overcome. In my case, dragons can be befriended or more, because I'm all for like interacting with my dragons. They are not necessarily the enemy. I also like exploring in my fiction who gets to define what a monster is. What is a monster, and what happens if you decide to take ownership of monsterhood? So a lot of my horror ends up being that. So if you want, I can actually read one of my short horror piece. Yeah?
So how do you get an idea for a book? Is it always from past experiences, or no?
It's a combination of things. So like I said, this one I saw it was it started off as a short story prompt. And it was like dragon stories. I'm like, all right, well, let me think of a dragon and a princess. And I wanted to flip that on its head. So like the tagline for the book is, before she can save herself, a princess must first save a dragon. But with her memory stolen and power forgotten, how can she do either? So I wanted to turn the idea of save the princess from the dragon on its head. I also like empowering characters who are normally, underrepresented, like females and princesses. I like kick-ass princesses. I do taekwondo, I do fencing, I also ride horses, so I need to make, half-ton animals listen to me. So like all of that kind of comes in. And so I started off, writing Beria's story, making the background. So I also have a bunch of myths that I wrote for this world too, which I can also share. And then I'm
guessing this isn't Earth?
Nope, it is not Earth. It just has a lot of inspiration from it. So actually one of the things I got, my husband picked this up in Taiwan, and I can pass it around. It's an indie published book in Taiwan for, they're doing like a living history of the various indigenous cultures. So I can pass that around if you guys want to look.
How long have you been writing?
I have been writing all my life. Like in kindergarten, we would get vocabulary, or first grade, we would get our vocabulary. And I'd be like, look, Mom, I wrote sentences. And I've always loved writing. I think I started, my very first like long-term writing project was like when I was 11, and it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fanfic. But I was like 11. I was like certain that, and it was like right around when the first movie came out. And I was like, I'm gonna write the novelization for the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie. Definitely. Because I had no clue whatsoever. I can take it back. And make a big mess at the thing. So, but yeah, that's when I really started finishing things. And then throughout middle school and then high school, we would do we would share writing. I did a really terrible mishmash of Madeleine L'Engle's The Time series, Wrinkle in Time and all of those, with like Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, but I wanted to, add the science in, and because I really liked science and faith and mixing those with magic. So I wrote that. I wrote comedies. I also wrote for the newspaper. So I also had a very, very tough teacher for my grammar for the news articles. So that helped. And then, I wrote about all my D&D characters and stuff. So I've just been always writing. When I had my first corporate job, I was working in finance, and I was a phone answerer for 401ks. And in between calls, I penned and completed my very first novel, which is yet another trunk novel that will never see the light of day. It was, no lie, 800 handwritten pages that helped me cope with talking about finance with people. So I did that. Yeah. So I have all that. I saved it. I needed to write that. I needed to figure out how I wanted to write medieval stuff because I fell in love with fantasy. It was a fantasy. Fantasies tend to run big. Lord of the Rings, anyone? Yeah. Yeah. So does that answer your question? Like how I got started with the writing and how I finished? And did I completely go off topic? Sorry. Yeah. Any other questions? I can read something else. I can read another chapter of this, or I can read my creepy horse story, or I can read my beekeeper queen story. What do you guys think?
Like the first book you made, was it really hard to publish it? Or?
Yes. Yeah. So the first book I published is currently out of print. It was with another mid-sized press. It was a middle grade. Also involved creepy horses. There's a theme. And it took me a long time sending out a lot of what's called query letters to people. And then I actually met the publisher at a conference because I do a lot of science fiction fantasy conventions. And she liked it. And so she bought it. And then I started talking more about middle grade. She's like, well, why don't you just, head the middle grade imprint? I'm like, oh, okay. So I sold a novel and got a job. And then I had 3 books out with them, 2 in the series that was The Kelpie, which started off with the Scottish fairy horse that eats small children. And the other one was a science fiction one, which I had also written, and that one was I was in the middle of a bunch of projects, and I was working at the Bay State Equine Rescue, and someone had this great mailbox on my drive there that had the name Starbard, and I'm like, that's the best sci-fi hero name ever. And as I thought that, and this is how my brain works, the character of Kira Starbard popped into my head. She's a precocious 11-year-old, and she had a little alien friend, and they went on adventures in the stars. I'm like, I don't have time to write you. I don't have time to write you. And her story, and this is because, I worked with a lot of things. So she was born deaf in a world that was not welcome to any disabilities or other abilities. But her family were supposed to hear the future from the songs of the stars. So she was considered a failure by her family standards and her society standards, except she had the ability to feel vibrations. And the sounds that stars actually make, because again, you fall down rabbit holes, stars actually do sing, they make noises, but you can feel them. So she was able to feel that and get things. And she also used that to help her with fixing machines. So she would like fix spaceships based on feeling how the energy flowed. So that one happened, and that one sold faster, and then we got bought out. And I lost my rights for 2 years, so I had to fight and get my rights back. I have not put them back out yet. So that was that, yeah.
You lose the rights to your own stories.
With a bad contract. So
basically make sure to read every single thing.
Read your contract and understand your contract.
If it has your name on it, it should be illegal for like them to try to the laws.
Yeah, well, again, that's one of the hard parts with publishing is contracts. Short stories, novels, all of that, you sign a contract. And what you should be signing with the contract is what's called first world publication rights. So they're the first ones that put this out into the world as either electronic, physical, and you work all that out in the contract. And you make sure that you hold on to your rights, that there's clauses that if you get bought out and these people are terrible people, you can pull your book back. So what it was is that it was still out. It was on Amazon, but I couldn't do anything with it. And I couldn't write any more in the series because the first one was out already. So that's why I wanted to get my rights back so I could republish the whole series. So those are all the other pitfalls of how hard it is to get published. With Heart, Wings, and Fire, I actually met the editor at a conference again. Going to conferences is like the best way to find people and learn about this. And I had a pitch session. And I told about this story, and he's like, that sounds awesome. And I got to send the manuscript. He read it and liked it and sent it, and like, I'll buy it, here we go. And yes, sure, we'll do a whole series on it. I'm like, yes. But I still have books that I've been trying to sell that I haven't yet. I've got a really cool, another middle grade called The Circus Under the Bed that I haven't been able to find a home for. So sometimes it's still hard. Same with some short stories that I've sent out to magazines and anthologies and haven't sold. And same with a lot of my poems. So it's a lot of try and try and try and try. Always try writing something new and send those out, because sometimes that's what gets picked up. Some of the short stories I wrote 10, 15 years ago never sold. I would want to go back to them because my writing's improved. So then I write new things. So like when I had the call for Don't Turn Out the Lights, I wrote a brand new story just for this because I wanted, to fit what they needed. With Animal Magica, my friend had read my writing, especially the stuff that I write that's child friendly. And she's like, I really need a sweet story and nobody wants to talk about bees. I'm like, I can talk about bees. My cousin happens to be the bee inspector for Central Mass. So I had a really cool thing on bee lore in this. And she's like, thank you. And she wanted it sweet, not dark. So it's only slightly dark. Beekeeper Queen. See, it's only one page, but it's like a cool little illustration. And so this is a combination of the story of Saint Felix. Are you guys familiar with Saint Felix?
I feel like I've heard it before, but
Saint Felix was the saint who loved all animals except bees and spiders, until basically a bee and a spider helped him not get caught and killed. So I played with that, and then I played with a lot of the lore of bees, because if you take care of bees and if the beekeeper passes away, you actually need to tell the bees or they get confused, because they do actually bond with the humans who keep them. And bees also communicate by dancing. So the way they move their legs and wings and the way they move in the air is how they communicate with each other, which is really, really cool. So that's why I wanted to throw all that into here. So this is super short. It is the Beekeeper Queen. The Beekeeper Queen once feared bees, but her dearest friend kept many hives in a magical garden. The Beekeeper Queen loved her friend and the gardens, but if a bee came too close, she would run in panic. Then, one warm afternoon, the Beekeeper Queen napped as a venomous snake entered the garden. Bee wings buzzed and a sting to the nose made her jump awake, while the other bees gave their lives to sting the intruder until it fled. After that, both girls cared for the bees with the garden for many, many years. But on a trip to the market to sell their honey, far from the hives, the snake found them, and it bit the beekeeper queen's friend. She brought her friend home, and when she drew closer, the bees swarmed to help carry their keeper. She buried her friend in the gardens and mourned in the language of bees, dance. In their shared dance, she promised to keep them as well as her friend had. To this day, if a keeper dies, a hive must be informed. Bees will dance the message all the way to the beekeeper queen, telling her which flower their keeper loved best, and she will plant it in her magical garden for her hives. She dances for all the beekeepers, passing their stories down through generations of hives, so they, like her dear friend, would stay memories as sweet and as gold as honey. So, I still kill someone, but it's sweet. Again, that's a lot of different ideas that kind of came to me, because I was raised Catholic, so I was familiar with St. Felix. I was actually really scared of bees a lot when I was younger. My husband, his family kept bees, and he actually knew my cousin, so we had a wedding. So when we got married, my cousin had come to the wedding, and he sees my husband's family, and he's like, "Ernie, Joyce, what are you doing here?" And we're like, "Our son's the groom. What are you doing here, Kenny?" "Oh, my cousin's the bride." Awesome. So there's that. There's the mythology of the bees telling the hive when their keeper dies. And then the idea that bees dance. So all those things kind of get worked into different stories. So, and that one again, that was a requested story. So someone says, "Hey, I need a story that does da 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 da." I'm like, "Okay, I can do that." So that's another way that you can get published once you've had a few things out. But yeah, most of my stuff ends up being a mix from a gazillion different sources. So any other questions you guys have about writing? I can read about creepy horses or more about dragons.
I have to go look for my little brothers.
Okay. Do you guys have a preference? Creepy horses, more dragons? Creepy horses? All right. So, this one came out in 2018, and I've signed a bunch of them. I still don't remember what pages I'm on anything. My very first publication, one of the first publications I had nightmares the day before my first reading, where I'm looking at the page and it wasn't in a language I understood. And I'm like, and I could see the page number. And that's the only thing I know what page it was. And it was my poem Kali. It was on page 93. But that's the only one I remember the page of, because I had a nightmare that was actually on the correct page. But so this is the Skelly Horse. Have you heard the call of a skelly horse? If you have, you are smart and didn't turn around. But I bet that cry still haunts your dreams. A skelly horse once belonged to a loving family. It was a horse with a kind personality, a horse that until its final day only wanted a partner. Perhaps its loving family fell in hard times and sold it, or perhaps they died and someone took it away. Somehow, some way, this gentle creature ended up in the wrong hands. The skelly horse gets its name because it is mostly skeleton. For its final owner, the one it had the misfortune of belonging to, starved it. Worms swell its bare ribs from cheap food and lack of care. It still has its face, skin over bone, with ragged lips and bulging red-veined white eyes. Stretches of flesh cover parts of its legs, down to its brittle split hooves, revealing cracked bones and overstretched tendons. It still has its mane and tail. They hang like knotted vines with mud and burdock. At dusk, when it's time to get home, for humans and for horses, the skelly horse appears, a sharp silhouette in daylight's dying beams. It first cries out with a ghostly whinny that sounds like it shouldn't be. A breathy hiss surrounds the plaintive neigh, inviting you to search for that source. Don't look. That's how it gets you. But if you ignore its voice, it trots closer. Brittle hooves clack and clatter hollow on stones and roads, squelching in mud and grass. Chuffing grunts echo in the darkening world. It quickens its gait to a lope, then slows back down to a walk as it gets closer. Closer. Don't look. That's how it gets you. The smell of dank earth and filth-filled barns thickens the atmosphere. Sour sweat reaches your tongue and anxious bile gurgles up your throat. You inhale its essence as it gets closer. Closer. Don't look. That's how it gets you. Hot air tickles the back of your neck, sends warm tingles over your shoulders. Your hair moves forward, carried by a ghostly wind not from any lungs. Prickles crawl up and down your spine, and you feel the heat of a hard day's work rolling off something big behind you. Don't look. That's how it gets you. The skelly horse's bones have been so broken, its body so hurt, that it cannot follow too long before it starts to fall to pieces. Bones crack, tendons creak and stretch, skin tears with soft rips. Muted groans and moans escape in uneven gasps from torn and tired lips that bubble and froth from overwork and drip, drip, drip in splashes behind you, maybe on your shoulders. Shuddering clunks signal a leg giving away, leading to a wind chime clatter of bones falling into a pile. Keep walking. Don't look. It can still get you. If you do turn around and chance a glance, that's all the skelly horse needs. When you see its ghastly body, twisted and starved by neglect and abuse, a horror will shove your heart to your throat. And as you grab your neck, the skelly horse takes a breath. And another. And another. And as your mouth gapes open in awful fright, the skelly horse breathes in your life. It sucks and pulls with ghostly lungs till your heart creeps up your throat to the back of your tongue, pounding through your palate. Then it breathes and it sucks and inhales even more till your heart flies from your mouth into its own. It lifts its skin-bound skull in the air and swallows your heart past its mangy, corded mane. And as you fall to your knees, you watch your heart slip into the skelly horse's ribcage, grow, and start beating there. Satisfied with its meal, with the heart it so longed for in life, the skelly horse shimmers for a moment in the body it once had, beautifully groomed, muscled, fed, and petted, then turns and trots into the night, fading with each clop of no longer brittle hooves. So if you hear the call of a skelly horse, the brittle clack of its hooves, if you smell unclean stalls and putrid sweat, if you feel the heat of its overworked body or its breath upon your neck, don't turn around, don't look, keep walking until you're safe at home. But if you know of a horse, still alive, heart still beating, that suffers, that's neglected, that just wants to know the love of a human heart, then look. Can you get it help? Keep looking, keep watching, and perhaps you can keep another skelly horse from rising. So, yeah. That one comes from working. I did horse rescue for 10 years before I adopted my own horses. But the barn I keep it in, Dudley, also just tends to pick up rescued animals. So the horse that I have is a rescue. Both of them are rescues from difficult situations. So I took seeing all of the stuff that the horses went to and turned it into a story. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have a favorite book of your own?
A lot of them. I love the Dragonlance fantasy books. It's a series that came out in the 90s that also has a character called a Kender that is very, ADHD. And I loved that. I also am a fan of Neil Gaiman's American Gods, because I liked his investigation into what it means to have faith and gods. I'm also a huge fan of Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time, Swiftly Tilting Planet, that series. I liked the Dris de Werden books from R.A. Salvatore. And what else is one of my go-tos? I like The Hobbit more than Lord of the Rings. And I think horror-wise, Neil Gaiman tends to be horror. The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I love that one. And I read a lot. So usually when I'm reading a book, my friend Elaine Isaac just released A Wreck of Dragons, which is science fiction and dragons. It's basically like if Pacific Rim meets How to Train Your Dragon. So that one was really cool. I enjoyed that. And those are off the top of my head. Unless I can wane on forever about books that I've enjoyed. Yeah? Okay, I can read a little bit from, this is easier. So what I did for, when this came out, I made a bunch of what are called chapbooks. And this is just so I have a lot of mythology. When I do world building, I like creating mythology because that's what people do. We tell stories. And so I took the myths and I actually collected them all into a little chapbook, at least the specific myths for Beria, because there's another whole culture that I haven't even gone into, but the next book does. But I had a lot of fun making this up. So I'll read to you. This one's a little bit longer, but I had a lot of fun with this. So there is a mythological, basically a folk hero called Between, and this is her origin story. A tailor and his wife were expecting twins to be born when the storm-bringer moon eclipsed the seal moon, hiding its light for much of the night. The mage priests say, and the sorcerers before the mage priests, and the wise men before them, that children born before the eclipse will start life strong and end weak. Children born as a storm-bringer moon covers the seal moon will be plagued by evil and bring evil into the world. But if a child is born as a seal moon is revealed after the eclipse, that child will be a beacon of light. The woman's belly grew through 9 cycles of the 2 moons, swelling even when they waned. Finally, the night of the eclipse was there, and the woman started her birth pains. She fought with the coming children, not wanting them to be born when the moons were getting dark. The older of the twins was strong-willed. Despite her mother's attempts and wishes, she came just as the eclipse hit the halfway point, neither in more darkness nor in more light. The younger twin daughter came easier, though slower, and the seal moon was more than 3/4 revealed at her birth. The girls grew, and as they did, they showed their personalities. The younger twin did indeed bring joy wherever she went. Her skin was pale, and her black hair reflected any and all light. Upon her entrance into a room, people would smile just in her presence, and her manners and grace were impeccable. The older twin, however, was not so fair, nor so sweet. But she had many friends, and for what she may have lacked in manners, she had in laughter, stories, and schemes. She never meant to hurt people, though sometimes in her thoughtless fun she would. One day, the older sister had been sent to wash the laundry in the river, a task she hated and found boring. I think most of us do. A water demon, swimming by, heard her sighs of lament and approached her. "Oh, what is a lovely lady such as yourself doing sitting by the water, attending to something so mundane as laundry?" The demon, like most when interacting with humans, wore a handsome face and spoke with perfect manners. While the older sister could tell what he was, the flattery still touched her. After all, it was usually her sister whom everyone called lovely, and who would not be a little jealous of that. Thank you for your kind words, sir, but I am not a lady, as you say, but a humble daughter of a tailor. With a face so beautiful you cannot be. Are you sure he is your father? That you are not a stolen child? I'm very sure I'm not a stolen child. My parents can count my birth. It was during the seal moon's eclipse. So you are a special lady, for it is auspicious to be born during an eclipse. It's auspicious if the Stormbringer moon is passing from the seal moon's face. I was born in the middle, so that is not so auspicious. Ah, but it is. To have equal measure dark and light is auspicious indeed. Perhaps for some, but not most I know, she said demurely, for while she could tell she spoke to a demon, she knew better than to insult him. A demon, of course, would find being born with darkness auspicious. Perhaps, then, you don't belong amongst those who don't appreciate your special birth. Come with me, and I'll show you what it'd be like to be not only appreciated, but adored. Would you come with me? I thank you for your kind invitation, but my parents do adore me in their way. I never wanted for food or clothes or affection. Oh, dear girl, you should know better than to lie to one like me. The demon's eyes grew dark. I can see you have wanted for affection, and I can give you such beyond any means your parents could ever give. Would you but walk with me that I might show you that affection? Once more I thank you. You are too kind, sir. But they have given much to raise me, and it would be disrespectful for me to just leave them. She was careful not to lie this time. While it was true she was well loved by her parents, she did want the affection they more often showered upon her lovelier, sweeter, better-mannered sister. You insult me to suggest your parents, a tailor and his wife, could care for you the way I would, maiden. I do not mean to suggest that, sir, but would you have me disrespect my parents for your offers of affection? They have already given a first payment to a matchmaker. Would you have them sell you to a man who couldn't adore you as I would? Would you let them disrespect you so? The older twin lowered her eyes and inclined her head, as she knew a modest woman should do. And her twin sister always did, but she herself often forgot. But in the presence of a demon, she knew she needed to play the game while scheming a safe escape. A thrilling feeling, she had to admit. One could not be too demure or too yielding or too sweet, lest such a creature trick a person and steal them away to the demon realm. Dear sir, she said again, for she also knew to call a demon what it was would anger it and bring its wrath upon her family. You are far too handsome and clever to adore one such as me. Besides my simple face and simple manners, would you want a partner who would blemish your grace in defying her parents? But if you find beauty in one so lowly as myself, and if you were to ask my parents for their blessing, they might give it freely. I would ever be so honored to be that which you adore. The demon growled at her, his expression twisting and revealing his true face for a moment. He knew no loving parent would freely give blessing to their child's union with a demon. When he regained his visage, he looked even more handsome than before. I see you respect your parents, and the God sees that as good. I will distract you from your chores no longer, but if you would be so kind and mannered to allow me to kiss your hand before I go. The older twin clasped a robe to her chest, her eyes still lowered in respect, and said, Dearest Lord, as my parents' livelihood is clothes, and they promise the lords whom they serve their valued clothes are touched by only the hands of their virgin daughters, I must respect that as well. I thank you once more for your kind and gracious attention, and I bid you the safest travels on your way. With his third invitation declined, the demon transformed again and gnashed his teeth. The older twin had been mannered and clevered, doing nothing to give reason for retribution, so he could do nothing against her but dive back into the water and leave. The older twin finished washing as quickly as she could, not daring to breathe even a sigh of relief, until she was near home and far from any chance of the demon seeing anything that might appear as disrespect. While she would never admit as much, for she could be somewhat proud, the older twin had been shaken by the meeting and kept the event to herself, though she was glad when her younger sister offered to wash the next day. When the shadows had grown to afternoon lengths and her sister had not yet returned from washing, Worry grew in the family, but none more than her twin. She wasted no time running to the river when her parents sent her to check on her sister. Her fears were confirmed when she found only a basket and clothes upon the bank. Falling to her knees, she gasped out a cry and stared into the waves of the river, searching for the face of the demon. Her sister was kind and well-mannered, but she could also take those traits too far. Not wanting to be rude, if she were caught unaware, she might have accepted one of the demon's invitations, leaving her open as his prey. She gathered the clothes, washing them with her tears, and slowly made her way home. She knew she was clever, and she knew she was stronger. Why had she let her twin go down to the water today? The older twin lamented that she could have prevented her sister's abduction. Demons work in threes. She should have known he'd come back and tempt her twice more. When she returned with the clothes, she did not tell the whole story. Her parents, seeing her tears, did not press. They alerted the town and search parties were sent, but the older twin knew such things were in vain. Only she could release her sister now. Eating herbs that stole sleep, she waited for her parents to retire, and she snuck down to the river. With the proper offerings in hand, she invited the demon to speak. Sending a tray of honey-sweetened rice and cream on a small boat to the handsome-faced demon, the older twin asked, "Dear sir, I offer this to you for knowledge of my twin sister. My parents are distressed, for as I'm sure you understand, she is their favorite child. What would it take for you to release her?" "What do you speak of, dear girl?" The demon reached for the food, but a shock stopped him. He glared. "The offerings are given in exchange. They are yours when you answer my question in full and with honesty." His face twisting once more with a growl, the demon stared at the older twin with a gaze so hot it burned. She did not flinch. She waited patiently, head bowed, eyed lowers in respect. "Your sister accepted my invitation to kiss her hand, and her touch allowed me to take her to my home. She refuses food or drink from my unending cups and plates of gold, and is not nearly the smart company I want by my side. So if you were to join me instead, I would free her." "Is there no other way for me to convince you to release her? Will you take no other offering?" "The cut-out hearts of both your parents, perhaps. Nothing less than that, or you by my side." The older twin replied, "Then I will join you by your side, but I need to prepare. Will you allow me to do so? I will return tomorrow night." "Then I will see you tomorrow night." The demon took the offerings and disappeared back into the water. The next night, the older twin once again stayed up until her parents were asleep. She knew part of what trapped people in the demon realm was eating or drinking that which was made there. And stories told of poor people who fell victim to the promises of cups and plates and bowls that never emptied. Taking the robes meant for her wedding, the older twin hid food and drink in its fold and went down to the river. The demon was waiting, her twin on his arm, and he smiled as the older twin approached. "I am here, good sir, and will join you once I see my sister walking the path to my parents' house." The demon stared at her for a long time. "I wish to see you as I would on our wedding night. Disrobe and cast your clothes into the water, and I will let you see your sister walking the road home before I take you below." The older twin said, "This is my wedding robe. To simply discard it into the water would disrespect the work my parents put into making it for me. If you would have me throw it away, may I change and leave it for them to resell the fabric?" "Can you leave and return before the sunrise?" "I will return tomorrow in my oldest robe, that I might cast that into your water and come naked to you as I would upon our wedding night." "You would leave your sister to me for another whole day for the sake of clothing?" The demon hugged her terrified-looking sister closer to him. "One must always hold one's parents above siblings and friends, and so I do. As you know, my sister is favored by my parents. She has eaten and drunk enough that another day without food or water will be little for her to bear. She hoped her sister understood and would not eat or drink, for if she did, the older twin knew, she would be lost to the demon realm forever. Tomorrow night, then, and if you are not ready, your sister will be mine forever." "I understand." Once the demon disappeared into the water again, the older twin left, only she did not head home. She headed to the butcher's and cut away the skin of a pig that was left to cure. Leaving the silken sash of her robe as payment, she snuck home, stealing her father's best needle and thread. When her parents awoke, she told them she was sick, so they would leave her. When they did, she took the pigskin, needle, and thread, and with the practiced hand of a tailor's daughter, she sewed the pigskin pockets to her own flesh. Then she pressed a healing paste and used her mother's makeup to hide her work. Once her parents went to bed, she hid food and water in her new pockets and returned to the river for the last time, wearing her oldest robe. Lord, I am here as your wife. I cast my robe into your water. Set my sister free as you promised. She stood there, naked and pale, praying that her handiwork was good enough, that it was undetectable to his demon eyes. You are a woman of your word, child of the half eclipse, equal parts darkness and light. I will keep mine. Her twin's feet touched the ground and she ran to her sister, but the older stepped away from her embrace. Go home and tell her parents what has happened, that I love them and respected them properly. Be happy in your life and know I will always love you. But go, now. The younger twin's face cracked with sobs, but she did as she was told, and the older twin watched her leave down the road. When she could no longer see her twin, she walked to the water and stepped upon the path the demon made. The older twin took her place by his side and let him bring her to the watery demon realm below. Everything in the demon's realm had a sumptuous facade and glamour, though the older twin could see better, as one might see the muddy bottom of a pond and its shining surface. When he offered her food and drink in a cup and bowl he said would be hers, she asked if she might have her first meal alone, that she might have one last memory of her family before becoming his wife. Pleased as he was that she was with him, he granted her request. When he was gone, the elder twin emptied the food and refilled the bowl and goblet with food and drink from her own realm, and she ate that. As she took each bite and each sip, she saw that her food was what refilled the vessel, and she felt a tie, an anchor to her own realm. When she let the demon take her to bed, she hoped her scheme would not be undone. He was a surprisingly gentle lover for a demon, and she felt her tether still. She tested the link and found she could return to the mortal realm at her will. So, when her husband traveled to play his demon games, she would return home and watch over her sister and family. Sometimes she would help others, exchanging advice for more food from the mortal realm to put in her bowl and her cup, strengthening her ties to the mortal realm. And now, if one is clever enough and brave enough, if one brings the proper offerings and shows the proper respect, the older twin might still answer cries for help, particularly those regarding demon troubles. So that's Between, my little folk hero. And she plays a part in the series, bigger than I expected. That's also how I write. Like, I get an idea and I write it, and then it actually has a reason later on. So, any last questions or anything? Yeah.
Have you ever taken like an idea from like a dream or like a nightmare or something?
Oh yeah, a lot of stuff comes from dreams and nightmares. With the Kelpie, which was my first book, there was this scene where these two horses were fighting, and this girl was stuck underneath them, and that was like an absolute dream that I had, like being stuck in the middle of a fight of two horses. Probably because I was once reared on by a horse. So those come through. The description of the dragon when he's moving in one particular scene is like a flash from another dream. A lot of different stuff. Actually, so I don't have writing in this. I was the editor for this one. And the cover of this, it's funny. So as the editor, I picked all the stories that are in this anthology. And one of them stuck out. Like, it gave me a nightmare the night after I read it. And when I sent the information to the cover artist, that very same story stuck out in her head, and this was the cover that she made. It's basically about this like witch in like a Starbucks dripping crumbs into her coffee, and I had a huge, like a long nightmare about that. Like, you know when you have a nightmare that just keeps going on and just getting worse? Yeah, that was that nightmare, which meant I had to buy the story because it's a horror anthology. And clearly that affected the cover artist as well. So it goes in multiple ways. Sometimes ideas come to me and I get a story out of it. Other times I'll read something and it'll hit my dreams. I'm like, obviously I need to buy that story. So, yeah. Any more questions? So thank you very much again. I'm Trisha J. Wooldridge, and I've got books. They're available at the Jacob Edwards Library.